Welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Lesley Stahl. For the 50th time, a President of the United States is being sworn into office. For President Reagan and Vice President Bush, the official swearing-in will take place this morning in a private ceremony at the White House. The public inauguration is tomorrow, but the festivities began Friday night as more than 50,000 invited Republicans and 40 marching bands came to Washington. Gone will be much of the lavishness and formality of Ronald Reagan's first swearing-in. Also gone, the patriotic emotionalism that came with the release of the American hostages. This time, the White House image team worked on a We the People theme. They want to convey a more egalitarian feeling. As the preparations proceeded, floats decorated, souvenirs hawked, the White House worked tirelessly to see that an impression that all's well in America is projected. This is the beginning of Ronald Reagan's last term. It could also be the beginning of George Bush's effort to win the Republican nomination for president in 1988. As the second term gets underway, will Mr. Bush be more active and more visible? We'll ask the Vice President, and we'll ask the Second Lady, Barbara Bush, if she wants to be First Lady. Is there a sense that all's well in America? And what can we expect in the second term? We'll ask pollster Robert Teeter and columnist David Broder of the Washington Post. 4 more years with Reagan and Bush, an issue facing the nation.
From CBS News, Washington, Face the Nation with White House correspondent Lesley Stahl.
George Bush begins his 5th year as Vice President. We spoke with him and Mrs. Bush earlier, and the Vice President talked about his hopes for the inauguration.
We wanted to have a theme of the people, and I think there is a new feeling in this country that the country's back. I mean, this isn't just a slogan. You have to travel around the country to sense it. And that isn't to say that there are no problems. There are. But there's a new feeling, a self-confidence, a reawakening of pride. There's a certain patriotic thing that I happen to think is good for a country, a certain realization that we are generous and decent. And having said all that, we've got a big job to do in the 4 years ahead.
Let me ask you a question President Reagan was asked earlier this week, and that is about the theme of the inauguration, We the People. Some people feel that the theme is really We the White People, and that blacks in this country continue to be left out of the recovery and the resurgence that you're talking about.
Well, I hope that's not what the inauguration conveys, because the answer to those, whoever have been left behind, is to have a continued recovery, have things moving. So there's nothing intended in that. And though we did not do well in the black community in terms of vote, to put it mildly, I know how I feel, and that is the day we were inaugurated, to get in there and start trying with sensitivity to do whatever is necessary to ameliorate conditions for people. But it's not to go back to the answers that have failed in the past. So we're not trying to convey exclusivity. We're trying to convey an inclusive feeling that everybody's involved.
The President said that he thought some of the black leaders were deliberately misrepresenting your positions in order to keep them as Democrats and anti-Republican.
Some of the black leaders, when you say leaders in terms of some of the organizations, have an old agenda and have old answers to solving very difficult problems. And we are not going to go down that road. And there are plenty of new black leaders who may not be the head of this organization or that, who believe that the opportunity economy and an opportunity society is a far better answer than a categorical program of some sort.
Let me ask you about another possible problem, and that is the budget.
That's a big problem.
If you were in charge, what would you be doing about that military budget? Would you agree to cutting it more than, say, the President is?
Well, it's already been cut. There's already been compromises, and what I'd agree to do is send up a budget that we think is prudent in terms of the national defense of this country. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And there may be some compromise on it, there may not. But our budget is not going to be larded. Defense is controlled by outside events and by what opposition forces have, not by what we'd like to spend.
So you agree that we should, that the country should have a big military budget, even if those deficits continue to grow, as they have been, without cutting back the defense?
We think that we will submit a budget that can take care of the deficits properly and still keep this country strong.
Let me ask you about what your role is going to
Okay.
be in the next 4 years. For the first term, you really weren't very visible. You didn't talk to reporters very much. We really didn't know exactly what your functions were. Are you going to be more public, and
No.
what are you going to do?
I'm going to be about the same. I was fairly visible. I traveled extensively, got a lot of coverage around the country when a vice president travels, but I can't think of a difference as how this role is going to be any difference. I want to support the president, support our policies. I have a hand in formulating them and shaping them, and if that means foregoing a chance to, hey, Mom, I'm on TV, okay, I'll forego it from time to time.
Oh, shoot. That's too bad.
No, but it really,
Well,
there's not going to be a dramatic shift in that.
You even made a little fun of your role during the campaign. At one point, someone said, "What's your advice to Geraldine Ferraro if she wins?" And you said, "Get a black veil," as if what you were doing mainly was going to funerals.
Well, I think the American people seem to see something a little different when you looked at the polling figures without Reagan and Mondale on top. And yeah, you go to some funerals, but I don't think it's all frivolous. And there's plenty of other things like drugs and deregulation and helping black kids in Atlanta, and a lot of things that the vice president does, maybe not with the same degree of attention of the president,
Well,
but it's basically to support and to advise
and this
with
supporting, though,
confidentiality.
you were lampooned, to say the least, during the campaign for being so supportive,
Yeah.
constantly loyal. If you do decide to run for president in 1988, won't that have hurt your image
Yeah.
if you continue along always being so supportive and never standing out, making a separate position?
What would hurt my image if I tried to say these are the good things, but I secretly told the president that he shouldn't do this or that, because somewhere along you trip over something called character, and I couldn't do that to the president. And I know there's a fascination in some, I'd say mostly the liberal quarters. Well, this is a crazy supporting the president like this, but I don't agree with that. I think loyalty is, as I said a while back, I've never considered it a character flaw.
I want to ask you a serious question on a foreign policy matter.
Yeah.
There are 5 American hostages being held in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
We don't hear very much about them, except suddenly we find that they may be put on trial as CIA spies. What is our government doing to try and win their release? Are we doing anything?
Well, we're doing an awful lot behind the scenes, but it's very difficult when you're dealing with wanton, random terror of this nature. And it's very hard to even know who is responsible. Various groups claim it, but there are things going on. But when it's hard to know, when you don't even know where people are, what to do about it.
Do we know that they're alive?
We think they're alive, but I know with certainty, no. But I'm not suggesting they're not. But you asked me, do we know it factually, definitively? I don't think we do.
Okay, let me ask you another question on a specific issue. What if Congress turns the administration down on the MX missile?
I don't think they will, and I'm not going to answer a hypothetical question like that because it would be a serious mistake. As the Soviets are modernizing their strategic force, for us to unilaterally stop doing something that is essential to our own modernization. And I don't think it would be good for the talks, and I don't think it's a good military defense policy. So I believe that the facts are such that we'll prevail, but it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard work.
Mr. Vice President, I'd like to welcome Mrs. Bush to Face the Nation this morning, and thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I assume by the wonderful smile on your face that you are happy that you will be involved in the next 4 years. Is that right? Are you looking forward?
Right, I think so. You've got 2 choices. You can like it or not. I choose to like everything I do.
Is that right? Well, what will you be focusing on mainly?
Well, you mean after I take care of George Bush, 5 children, 5 in-laws, and 7 grandchildren, why, I'll be doing what I did the first term, which was work very hard supporting programs that helped wipe out illiteracy, whether they're in preschool all the way up to basic adult illiterates.
I want to ask you a question about the Vice President running for president, your husband running for president in 1988. Do you think he should?
You want a really honest answer?
Of course.
I think timing is everything. And I think it's way too soon to think about that. And I think it'll make a difference how the administration's doing. And my theory is, and boy, I can live very comfortably with this, is if George does a good job and the president does a good job and timing's right and he should do it, he'll do it, and I'll be there. If not, I'll be very happy doing whatever he's doing.
But I read somewhere that you said it was inevitable, that his running for president was inevitable.
If I said that, I probably didn't know what the word meant. What I really meant was that if it's to be, it's to be.
I see. But after what the campaign you just went through, when Mr. Bush was lampooned and was criticized, the Vice President himself called it an ugly campaign. Are you anxious to get into that again?
Well, one would hope if I got into it, I'd be better behaved.
Well, what
And it
what
wasn't
are you
that
saying
bad, Lesley.
specifically?
Look, it wasn't that bad. We won 49 states. The polls relating to my performance, and I guess that would lump Barbara's in there, were all very positive. So the handful of lampoonists that you talk about were far outweighed by fantastic press coverage all across the country and a standing and a support from the party that, for me at least, has been unprecedented.
But the answer is it hurt very badly.
It hurt.
Me, because it was so unfair to him, but it's all over, and it's like having a baby. 3 months later, you forget, and as George says, we did win. Here we are.
What would you do differently? I'd like to ask both of you that. Mrs. Bush?
I wouldn't do anything differently except one thing.
The one comment.
Because, yes, I would never say that or mean it or think it, so I would never, I'll be more careful.
But
And that's too bad.
Do you feel in a campaign that the wife of the candidate can't be witty, or is there other
Well, that
restrictions?
wasn't very witty, really, tell you the honest truth.
Not if that's picked up by a group and tried to make look like a character flaw or a change in image or something. I mean, if people are so serious when something, like Barbara said, for which she immediately apologized and for which she felt terrible, is then picked up by some analyst as, oh, the Bush family are trying to change their character, that takes the fun out of it. I made a sporting analogy that I thought, you know, one, I didn't think I was saying it publicly. Two, I probably wish I hadn't said it privately, because I went around explaining to a bunch of serious questions. Are you changing your image? Are you trying to be something you're not? Are you trying to you know, put somebody down, macho kind of thing? And it got so ridiculous.
I thought it was a conspiracy. I like that particularly.
So but it's not, that's past. And Lesley, it was far outweighed by result and by press coverage. And look, we're grown up. Nobody's going to love you all the time. And if people go after you, that's fine. I think for some of them, it's a game. So it doesn't, and there's a healing process. Nobody worries about that now. Forget about it all. And look at, here we are, right in the middle of an inauguration.
Mrs. Bush, I'd like to ask you about the reports that Mrs. Reagan is extremely influential over her husband when it comes to politics and sometimes policy. Do you think if you were the First Lady that you would be that involved?
Well, I'd hope I'd be as good a First Lady as I think she is. And I hope George would certainly listen to me.
Invite you to cabinet meetings?
No, and Nancy Reagan doesn't go to cabinet meetings either.
I just asked.
But, you know, I found a very funny thing. I don't know if I dare tell George this, but sometimes we disagree on things, and about 4 months later, he agrees a little more with me. And maybe that's what Nancy Reagan finds out.
Oh, good. Tell us on what,
well,
for
no,
instance?
I can't think of any,
come
but
on.
just occasionally.
On some of the social issues, maybe?
Maybe just some things. Anyway, I find it's I'm not as influential, thank heavens, as maybe I'd like to be, but occasionally he sees things my way.
Well, that's encouraging.
I try to be broad-minded, I mean.
I think that obviously this is a very happy weekend for you and for the Reagans. So I'd like to end on a upbeat note, since that's the theme of the inauguration, and ask Mrs. Bush if she can confirm this quote that I have read that's been attributed to her.
Whoops.
Did you say of your husband that he was the handsomest looking man you ever laid your eyes on, bar none? I mean, my boys don't even come close to him, nor did his own brothers.
Did you?
Did you?
Yes, I said that, and I mean it, and I
Gosh.
still mean it. But that was 40 years ago, I think.
Gee.
No, I mean it today.
That's wonderful. Thank you both very much. Vice President and Mrs. Bush, we'll be right back. Joining us now, David Broder, columnist for the Washington Post, and Republican pollster Robert Teeter. Bob, the inauguration theme is all's well in the country. Now, I know you've been polling. Is that just a slogan that the administration is trying to whip up for the inauguration, or is there really something to that out in the country, a feeling of optimism and confidence?
Well, there's certainly more a feeling of optimism than there's been for a long time. I mean, we've seen poll after poll for the last 3 or 4 weeks now that show that well over 60% of the people think the country's going in the right direction. Well over 60% say they're optimistic about the next 4 years. But I don't think that's the first time. I mean, I think it's important to realize that optimism and patriotism and some of these qualities that we've talked about now are pretty traditional American values. Those are things that have been present in this country for a long time. And I think we just went through a period of 12 or 14 or 15 years that we really got away from them. And this has been a very difficult, divisive period for the last 10 or 15 years in this country. And I think what we've done now is kind of come back around to our more traditional attitudes.
I guess that raises the question, David, as to whether Ronald Reagan is enjoying the residue of that feeling in the country, or whether he's creating it.
I don't think that it's just his personality. I think something changed, and the biggest single change was that inflation abated. 4 years ago, this country was being driven nuts by inflation, and I think the main reason that people feel better about themselves and more optimistic about their future is that now inflation has eased to the point that families can actually plan their own economic future a little bit with some hope that they can achieve their own goals.
I mean, there are a lot of things, but I think David pointed out the most important one, and it's indicative. The thing that's been the greatest success of the president is his performance. I mean, things are better today, at least the great majority of people think things are better today, particularly the economy and inflation, than they were 4 years ago. I mean, there's leadership and a lot of other things, but the performance, I think, is the key.
Well, let me ask you then about the second term, which we're starting. Even for presidents who have performed well in the first term, they're usually disasters for presidents who do get reelected. History has shown us that. Is there anything about Reagan and his team that make you think he may not fall victim to that curse?
I think disaster is too strong a word. The last two-term president we had was Dwight Eisenhower, and the second term was not a disaster, but he got hit with some accidents that in a second term he didn't have any chance to recover from.
Nixon.
There was a scandal.
Don't forget Nixon.
Well, but that was not a completed second term, and whatever we've got ahead, I don't think we've got another Watergate in store for us. No. Knock on something here.
No, but is there something in his character or something in the team he's pulled together that makes problem solving more effective? It certainly seems that way by the first term.
Well, I think there may be two things, but we really don't know, because I think you do have to go back to Eisenhower to have a comparable period. But the first is, he does give the country a very strong sense of leadership and a direction. I mean, there was a feeling that he really changed the direction of the country, of economic policy, beginning in '81 and '82, and that may help him a lot, is that if he can continue that, it's really a sense of direction, I think, in the second term.
David,
I think on that point, one of the things that the president has done successfully is to limit his objectives and to keep those few objectives out front. He's done that now for his second term. It's clear what his main goals are. What is not clear is how much success he'll have in doing them. And we've got this interesting experiment because everything under the president in the White House has changed. It's a new administration, except for Ronald Reagan and George Bush in the White House.
it seems to me, and let me ask if you agree, that Jim Baker and Richard Darman in the first term were successful in negotiating successes for the president, but through compromise, but making it seem as though they were Ronald Reagan's successes. Somehow they managed to reach compromise and then declare that Reagan had won. Is the new team that's coming in with Don Regan going to be as successful, do you think?
Don Regan has a very different personality. He is a more combative, more flamboyant personality. I don't know how well he's going to work, but obviously the president saw something in that personality that made him think it was going to work.
I think it always happens that presidents probably, anytime they accomplish anything, they compromise, and because they are the sitting president, whatever good comes out of that benefits them, always accrues to sitting presidents. particularly if they're personally popular, as this one is. And I think that will continue. I mean, I think it's also true that whatever happens in a White House really does come from the top down. I think that the president had a very, very good staff in Jim Baker and Dick Darman and those people this last term. But at the same time, any organization really is the product of the guy on top. And how well the people perform under him, I think, is very related to who is running that organization, in this case, the president.
Now, Ronald Reagan was elected, obviously, by a huge majority. Will he, do you think, in the second term, become a centrist president? Or do you think that he will continue to try and make his mark as one of the most conservative presidents we've ever had? Will he pursue that new right agenda, social issues, whatever else, or not?
I think he'll continue very much as he did in the first term. I think that's what people voted for, and I think he understands that. I mean,
what did they vote? You think they voted for that
I think they
conservative?
No, I think they voted for him to continue very much as he did. I think they voted with a sense that his first-term policies were not going to stop today at noon and a whole different agenda start
but
at
so
12:30
many polls
today.
showed that they didn't like so many of those conservative
But remember,
policies.
is that most of his first-term accomplishments, and the voters and when the polls are, were all focused on the big two issues of the economy and foreign policy. And the voters, you don't see much in the polls about those kind of second-level issues of what you think of all the social issues. I think there's a strong feeling that he restored some traditional values, but that doesn't get into abortion and prayer in schools and all of those things.
So you think he'll be centrist?
I think that he'll continue to his same positions on those issues. He'll work for them, but I don't think that they'll be the main two agenda items. I think he'll stick with the economy and foreign policy.
On the social issue agenda, Lesley, he can do two things. He can give them speeches, which he will do, and when he has an opportunity, he can give them Supreme Court appointments, which he will do. And if you mean by that he is a centrist president, those are not going to be centrist Supreme Court appointments. Those are going to be conservative, ideological appointments if and when he has that opportunity.
And he is going to speak to the anti-abortion march as it goes by the White House this week, which he didn't do in the first term.
He's been a conservative president all through the first term, I think, and I think he's going to continue to be that in the second term.
All right, let me ask you a very quick final question. Do you think that Ronald Reagan will throw his support to George Bush for the '88 nomination? David?
Well, if Bush didn't tell you, I don't certainly know the answer to that question. My guess is no. I think that he will let that play out by itself.
I don't think there's any way to know that. Probably the president doesn't know that at this point.
Something to look forward to. Thank you both, Bob, David, and we will be back with the lighter side of the inauguration in a moment. Finally, views of the inauguration from the Cincinnati Enquirer and the Orlando Sentinel. Jim Borgman imagines the moment when the Chief Justice asks, "Do you solemnly swear?" And Ronald Reagan replies, "No questions, please. This is a photo opportunity." And Dana Summers shows us a couple watching the ceremony from Baltimore. We could have gotten great inauguration seats, but no. You had to mention that we were from Minnesota. I'm Lesley Stahl. Have a good week.
Face the Nation with White House correspondent Lesley Stahl was produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guests and topic. This broadcast originated from Washington, D.C.